When I talk about interviewing from a way to support product discovery, I want a team having at least one customer conversation every single week. That customer conversation could be as short as 30 minutes. And in that conversation, they're asking one story-based question. They're asking their customer to tell them a story about a time when they did a thing. So it could be, tell me about the last time you watched Netflix. It could be, tell me about the last time you bought groceries. It could be, tell me about the last time you looked for a job. Just collecting a story. The purpose of that story is to uncover unmet needs, pain points, and desires. This is a very specific type of interview. Okay, so now we have interviewing on the research side and interviewing on the discovery side. If I want to interview to answer any research question and to be able to create a good research report and have findings be transferable across populations and predict behavior from this small number to this big number, I need good, strong, slow research methods. That's what our user researchers are doing. My product team is just looking for insights. We're just looking for what's coming up in our customer stories over and over again. We're using one interview method, story-based interview. I can tell you, I can teach a product team that has no research background how to collect a story. It's not that hard. It takes practice. It is a skill that needs to be developed, but it can be taught. A product manager can learn it. A designer can learn it. Engineers can learn it. I know this because I've told over and over again, and I've seen people who are not researchers collect perfectly good stories. And the reason why that works is we're taking a research activity and dramatically simplifying it so that a non-researcher can do it. It doesn't mean this team over here is now doing this research activity that our user researcher should be doing. They're fundamentally different. This is same with assumption testing. With assumption testing, we're starting with a very specific assumption, and we're saying, can we collect some data that helps us to evaluate that assumption? It's not an experiment. It's not a research study. We're not going to draw strong conclusions. We're just going to get a fast feedback loop. Again, assumption testing is a research-like activity that we've dramatically simplified to make it really easy for a product team to do it. And again, this is why some people interpret it as like Teresa thinks product teams can do research. No, I think product teams can do product discovery. And what that does is it frees up our user research teams to do real research. Because how a lot of companies are using their user researchers is they're using their user researchers to run all the usability tests. If I have a degree, like an advanced degree and a lot of experience with research methods, dear God, I should not be running usability tests. We can teach a product team how to run a reliable usability test, right? So I actually think this is best for everybody. It lets our product teams move fast. It lets our researchers focus on the harder research. Now, here's the thing. I can't just take any product team off the street and say, go interview an assumption test and expect reliable and valid feedback loops. There are skills involved in interviewing, and there are skills involved in assumption testing, and those product teams have to invest in learning those skills. And they can do that in a lot of ways, right? I tried to write the book in a way that if you're a reader and you know how to apply what you read, like there's enough in chapter 5 for you to run your first story-based interview. I wrote it that way, hoping that would be the case. Some people need practice, so we also have a course that lets people practice story-based interviewing, right? You can practice on your own. You can practice just with your own teammates. There's lots of ways to build this skill, but what I see a lot of teams do is they don't see it as a skill. They don't practice. They go into an interview completely unprepared. They don't know what a story is. They don't collect a story. They just ask whatever questions they want off the top of their head, and they get completely unreliable feedback. And that's just not going to work, right? So even on the product discovery side, there are skills and habits that we have to develop to make it be effective.
I've used a lot of the techniques in your book for my podcast. Just because it's the essence of it is to get like a story, almost optimizing for really high quality anecdotal evidence to help give you like separate the signal from the noise. And then you test real quick just to make sure that, hey, did I understand that correctly? Or, oh, they said this in their story. But after testing the assumption, it's probably because of a different reason that they said that.
Yeah, I'll tell you about, I was working with a team at a bank, that issued mortgages. So for people buying a house. And their outcome was to reduce the time it took from the start of a mortgage application to the mortgage being approved. That was their outcome. Reduce the time it takes to issue a mortgage. I started working with them. They had never talked to a customer. They had very little understanding of the internal process for what it took to get a mortgage approved. They were just a product team at a bank assigned a new problem. So we did two things. First thing they did is they mapped out what they thought the process was for a mortgage to get approved. So they did an experience map of what they thought happened, all the steps along the way, both from their customers and from their bank side. So you can imagine this map looked like where somebody comes to the website and they fill out an initial me a quote, and then that goes to the bank and they have to return a quote, and then they collect financial documents, so they go back and forth. And then as they get into the purchase process, a mortgage appraisal has to happen. There's all these steps. Okay, so they outlined what they thought happened. Then they went and they started interviewing both internal employees that were involved in each of those steps and customers that had recently applied for a mortgage. And they asked the customer, tell me about your experience applying for a mortgage. And they asked their employees, tell me about the most recent mortgage application that you processed. And they just focused on the steps that was relevant for that employee. So for example, there was an employee that was responsible for getting an appraisal scheduled. And they asked that person, tell me about the last appraisal you had to get scheduled, right? And then for different employees, different parts of the process, and they mapped it all out. And before they did any of these interviews, they thought the way to reduce the time of a mortgage application was to allow customers to upload all their documents to the website. So they were a regional local bank, and the way customers submitted their documents was they literally went to a bank branch and said, here's all my documents. Okay, they spent 1 week. They interviewed 4 different employees that were involved in the process, and they interviewed 3 customers. And here's what they learned. It takes about 3 days for the customer to fill out the initial form online and to go to a bank and return the document. It takes 14 days for the appraisal to get scheduled and to happen. And then it takes about 3 days for the bank to approve the mortgage based on the appraisal and all the documents.